I've never been one to believe in those stories about hauntings in roadside motels. I always thought it was something that came from a bad movie or people wanting attention. I've been working as a truck driver for over 15 years, I've slept in places you wouldn't even imagine, and the most I've seen were cockroaches and a musty smell. But there's one night that makes me rethink all that, a stop I made at a crossroads in rural Alabama. It was supposed to be just another normal night, but to this day, when I remember that place, I feel my stomach churn and I get the feeling that there is something wrong watching me. The road was empty, with no cell phone signal, and the GPS started to crash around 9 at night. I hadn't slept much the previous days, so I decided to stop at the first place I saw. It was a rundown motel, with a neon sign flashing, "Vacancy," one of those really cliché ones, as if it had been taken straight from a 70s movie. There was no reception, just an intercom with a metallic voice telling me to get the key to room 6, which was already unlocked. I thought it was strange, but the sleep was greater than any suspicion. The room was simple but clean. A double bed with a faded brown bedspread, a tube TV, and a ceiling fan that made a strange noise, like something was stuck in the blades. I tried to turn on the TV, but it just hissed, even when I changed the channel. I shrugged, took a drink of water from the thermos I carry in the car and lay down. It started slowly. First was the sound of the fan, which seemed to change pitch subtly, as if someone were whispering in time with the blades. I thought it was all in my head, accumulated fatigue. But then I started to feel a strange cold, and that didn't make sense because the room was stuffy, typical of summer in the South. I got up to see if the air conditioning was on, but there wasn't even one in the room. I went to the door to see if there was a draft coming from outside, but the door was tightly closed. When I got back into bed, I noticed the bedspread was pulled up to my feet. I had left it folded in the corner because I always get hot at night. I stood there staring at it for a few seconds, trying to figure out if I had pulled it without realizing it. I even thought I might have kicked it by accident, but the bedspread was too stretched for that. That bothered me, but I still tried to find a logical explanation. I tried to lie down again, but I started to get that feeling that there was someone in the room with me. It wasn't just discomfort, it was a strange certainty, as if I was being watched from somewhere. I quickly turned my head to the left, towards the bathroom, and I swear on everything I saw a shadow pass by there, quickly, almost imperceptibly, but I saw it. I got up again, turned on the bathroom light, and searched every corner. Nothing. No sign that anyone was there, no open window, no out-of-place door. I even laughed, a little nervously, thinking I must be having a sleep hallucination. But when I came back, I noticed that my hat, which I had left hanging on the corner of the chair, was now on the floor. There was no wind. No draft. The room was a stuffy box. I stood there staring at the hat for a few seconds, waiting for some movement, some noise. Nothing. Just the low hum of the fan and the heavy silence, as if the place were sucking the sound out. By this point, I could no longer pretend that it was just fatigue. There was something wrong in the room. Something that didn't want me there. I decided to go out and sleep in the truck, which was parked right in front. I grabbed the key and went to the door, but when I turned the handle, it simply wouldn't open. I froze. I twisted hard, shook, tried to push and pull. Nothing. The handle turned, but the door wouldn't unlock. I looked out the little window next door and saw my truck there, intact, with the cabin lit, just as I had left it. But for some reason, it felt further away, like it was meters away from where I remembered parking. This gave me a headache. I started to sweat coldly, even though the room was getting colder and colder. I went back to the center of the room, taking deep breaths, trying to stay calm. I sat on the edge of the bed, with my head down, and that's when I heard it. 3 sharp knocks on the wall behind me. Directly on the wall at the head of the bed. It wasn't plumbing, it wasn't furniture. They were loud, rhythmic knocks, as if someone was on the other side trying to get my attention. I turned around and put my ear to the wall, but I heard nothing. No voices, no movement. Just silence again, a silence that seemed to weigh down the air, making it hard to breathe. I decided to knock back. I don't know why, maybe I was trying to show that I wasn't scared or that I wanted some explanation. I knocked 3 times, the same way. And the next second, the lights in the room went out. Everything. The fan, the lamp, even the sound of the TV being turned off disappeared. The room was in total darkness, a kind of darkness I had never felt before. You know when you try to get your eyes used to the lack of light and still can't see a thing? That was it. I got up in the dark, groping until I found my cell phone to use the flashlight. But when I turned on the screen, it blinked once and then went out again. The battery was dead, and I had charged it that morning. That's when I started hearing breathing. Faint, but close. Like there was someone lying in bed behind me, breathing deeply, almost snoring. I didn't have the courage to turn around. I stood there, my heart racing, until I felt the mattress sink. First on one side, as if someone had sat down, then deeper, as if the thing had laid down. And his breathing increased, became more breathless, as if he knew I was listening. I froze. My feet were glued to the floor. I just wanted to get out of there, run, scream, anything, but my body wouldn't listen. It felt like the air had turned to cement. I don't know how much time has passed. I just know that suddenly the lights came back on. The fan turned on again, turning slowly. The TV kept hissing. The bedspread was completely stretched out, without any wrinkles. And the door, that time it opened with a soft click, as if it had never been locked. I grabbed my things on impulse, without even checking if I had everything with me, and ran out. I got into the truck, shaking, started the engine and drove away without even looking in the rearview mirror. It was only when I reached a nearby town, about 2 hours later, that I stopped to take a breath. I looked at the passenger seat and realized that my hat, it wasn't there anymore. I don't remember leaving it in the room. I went back there days later, in a stupid attempt to understand, or to convince myself that I had freaked out because of tiredness. But the place simply didn't exist anymore. Where the motel used to be, there was now a vacant lot with some concrete remains and tall grass. I asked at a gas station nearby and the guy just said that the motel had been demolished years ago after a fire. That no one had spent the night there since a guest was found dead, alone, locked inside, with signs of having been suffocated, but the room showed no signs of forced entry or forced entry. From that day on, I never slept outside the truck again. And even inside it, sometimes, I still hear that breathing. Very close. I've never liked driving at night, but sometimes you have no choice. The shipment was supposed to be delivered before dawn, and I was already late because of a detour on the interstate. I took a secondary, somewhat deserted route, cutting through a more rural area of Georgia. It was about 2 in the morning, the road was empty, with only the truck's headlights illuminating the old asphalt and a few trees that seemed to close in around it. When I saw the checkpoint ahead, with the orange cones and a police car stopped with its lights flashing, I was actually relieved. I don't know, it gave me a sense of safety in the middle of nowhere. Little did I know what was waiting for me. I pulled over slowly, rolled down the window, and one of the police officers approached. His uniform was impeccable, his flashlight in hand, and he had a stern expression on his face. He asked for my driver's license and the truck's documents, and I handed them over without question. But something bothered me right away. When he pointed the flashlight at my face, the light reflected in the rearview mirror, but his face didn't appear in the reflection. It was as if only the light was shining and nothing else. I thought I had seen it wrong, so I pretended to rub my eye and looked again. Nothing. No sign of him in the mirror. Then a second police officer appeared in the rearview mirror on the other side of the truck, and again, no reflection. That gave me a chill that came from my stomach. I tried to stay calm, but I started to sweat. The two of them started to walk around the truck, slowly, as if they were evaluating something. But they didn't ask any questions or talk to each other. They just looked at each other, and they seemed too coordinated, as if each step was rehearsed. One of them bent down next to the passenger side and put his hand under the cab. The other stood next to me, in silence. The radio in the car was hissing softly in the background, with a strange frequency. It almost sounded like people whispering in another language. I tried to start the engine again, just to get some reaction, but the dashboard went completely dead. That's when I started to panic. I went to open the door to get out and try to run to the woods, but it wouldn't open. It wasn't even locked, it just wouldn't open, as if something was pressing on it from the outside. I looked at the police officer who was closest and saw that he was still staring at me, but his eyes were too dark, dull, like two holes. When he smiled, I felt an immediate nausea. That wasn't a human being. It was as if something was disguising itself as a human, trying to imitate it. And I was there, trapped with them. It was at that moment that the police car's lights went out, and everything went into complete darkness. I don't know how to explain it, but when darkness took over everything, it was as if the truck ceased to exist. I couldn't hear the engine anymore, I couldn't feel the seat under my body, nothing. It was just me there, in the dark, and that presence. A feeling of being sucked in, as if my consciousness was slipping away. And then, out of nowhere, the light came back on. But not as if it had been reconnected. It was like I had gone back in time. The road reappeared before me, the headlights on, the dashboard lit. And there, further ahead, was the Blitz again. Same position, same cones, same flashing vehicle. As if nothing had happened. Only this time, I already knew what it was. I tried to make a U-turn right there, before getting close, but the steering wheel locked. The truck simply wouldn't obey. It was as if I had been swallowed by a script I no longer controlled. The same two police officers approached, each from one side, and everything began to repeat itself. The request for documents, the absent reflection in the mirror, the same feeling that something was deeply wrong. But now, I could feel time bending. It wasn't just déjà vu, it was like I was stuck in a cycle. I started screaming, desperate. I honked the horn, kicked the dashboard, tried to break the window with my elbow. Nothing worked. The cabin seemed muffled, as if no sound was coming from inside. The police officer on the driver's side calmly placed his hand on the hood, and it was as if the entire truck shut down again. Silence. Darkness. A suffocating pitch black that lasted for what seemed like hours. But then, there I was again. Lights on, engine running, the road in front of me, and the checkpoint forming once again. It was exactly the same. But now, something new happened. The truck's radio turned on by itself, and began playing a recording of my own voice. It was me. Screaming for help. I no longer knew if I was alive or dead, awake or dreaming. That was torture. An endless trap. I started to notice that every time the cycle started over, something changed. A cone that was crooked, the flashlight blinking more slowly, one of the police officers turning his head faster than he should have. Small mistakes, as if whoever was acting it out was starting to lose control of the disguise. And every time I tried to escape, everything would go blank, everything would restart, as if I were a little mouse trapped in a cage that would return to the starting point every time it hit the wrong wall. The last time it reset, I did something different. Instead of trying to run away, I stood completely still. I didn't speak, I didn't react, I just stared at the two of them as they approached. That's when I noticed something new. They hesitated. For a second, they both stopped walking and exchanged a look. As if they hadn't been expecting it. As if, for the first time, I had broken the logic of the cycle. And then the voice on the radio changed. It wasn't mine anymore. It was a deep, drawling voice, saying my name with a frightening calm. I don't know how, but that voice knew me. And I felt like if I answered, I wouldn't get another chance. I closed my eyes tightly and began to repeat in a low voice that this wasn't real. That I didn't accept it, that I wanted to get out. Suddenly, a sharp pain exploded in my left ear, as if someone had screamed inside. I fell back on the seat, holding my head, with my eyes still closed. And the next second, silence. I opened my eyes slowly and realized that I was in a rest area, during the day, with the sun rising on the horizon. My truck was parked, engine off, everything normal. My documents were on the dashboard. No sign of a checkpoint, no cones, no police cars. It was as if it had all been a dream, but I knew it hadn't been. I looked in the rearview mirror and, for the first time in hours, I saw my own reflection. But for a second, I swear, my reflection smiled before me. Subtly, almost imperceptibly. As if something inside was still watching me. I got out of the truck, walked to a nearby gas station and sat on the ground for a few minutes. An attendant came to ask if I was okay, said that I had arrived there in the early hours of the morning, but I seemed to be sleeping with my eyes open. That was what scared me the most. I was stuck in that cycle and, at the same time, my body kept driving. As if someone had taken over me from the inside. Since then, I have never taken that road again. I have never driven at night again. And to this day, every time I look in the rearview mirror, I wait for that moment when maybe, just maybe, the person reflected there is no longer me. This was, without a doubt, the most bizarre and terrifying moment I've ever experienced on the road. I was in Missouri, heading towards Kansas, cutting through a more rural area because of a detour. It was about 3 in the morning, and the road was so empty that I couldn't even pick up a radio signal. The road passed by an old railroad track that, according to the map, had been out of use for decades. It was just a crossing with a rusty sign and some remnants of sleepers, no tracks, no sign of a train for years. As I approached, I slowed down out of habit. Even without tracks, I always have my guard up at this type of crossing. That's when I heard the noise. At first it was low, a metallic sound that seemed to be coming from far away. I thought it was the truck, or maybe something loose in the back of the truck. But the sound got louder too quickly. A high-pitched, loud whistle, cutting through the early morning air. I instinctively looked around, and that's when I saw it, a train. Not a regular train, but an entire train coming toward me from the left side, except there was nothing there. No tracks, no structure, just dirt and weeds. The train was coming fast, lit from within, but with no visible driver, and its headlights on as if it were in operation. But it probably didn't even exist. I froze. I couldn't get out of there. Even if I tried to reverse or accelerate, it felt like the truck had locked up. The dashboard flickered, the engine sputtered, and all I could see was the train approaching like an avalanche. The cars looked like they were made of old, rusty iron, but they reflected a strange, almost blue light. When it passed me, there was no collision. The train passed through the truck like smoke, but in that moment, I felt everything. An absurd heat, as if I had entered an oven, and a pressure in my chest that made me almost pass out. The truck's lights exploded, and the radio began to crackle with the sound of muffled screams. When the train had completely passed, there was immediate silence. A cemetery silence, suffocating. I stood still for a few seconds, trying to understand what had happened. The first thing I did was look at my hands. They were red, as if they had been burned, and so was the steering wheel. I staggered out of the cab and saw the sides of the truck covered in dark marks, like soot but with a burnt texture. The air was still hot, heavy, as if it had traces of something that shouldn't be there. I looked back in the direction the train had come from, and there was nothing. No sign that it had ever been there. I tried to start the truck again, but it simply wouldn't work. No lights on the dashboard, no ignition. The radio was dead, and my cell phone had no signal. It was as if I had been torn from reality for a few minutes and thrown back into a distorted world. I walked a little way to the middle of the road, with the spare flashlight that I keep on the dashboard, and took a closer look at where the train had passed. On the ground, where the tracks should have been, there were deep marks as if something very heavy had crossed there, furrowing the dry earth. It was impossible. There hadn't been a functioning railroad in that region for over 40 years. I started to wonder if I had fainted, if I was hallucinating, I don't know. But then I saw a detail that stopped me. In the middle of the woods, next to the supposed crossing, there was an old iron marker, half-tilted, with the symbol of a railway company that no longer exists. And behind him, half-hidden, a wooden crucifix stuck in the ground, almost erased by time. When I looked closely, I noticed that someone had written something on the wood with a penknife or knife, "Don't stop at night." This gave me a shock. Who wrote that? And why? It seemed like a warning. A warning I ignored. I went back to the truck, sat on the edge of the cab, trying to breathe, and I started to feel the skin on my hands burning. They were starting to blister, as if I had touched a hot plate. I went to the back of the truck, opened one of the doors to get some water, and saw that some of the boxes were scorched, as if the heat from the train had passed through the entire truck. That took away any doubt that what I had experienced was real. It didn't make any sense, but it was real. And the strangest thing of all was that, when I tried to get back on the road and leave, the truck's GPS showed that I was still before the railroad. As if I had never passed it. The road looked the same, but something was different. The vegetation, the trees, even the smell of the air. Everything gave me a sense of distorted déjà vu, as if I had stepped into a copy of the real place. I drove for almost an hour without finding any other roads or signs. The GPS map is frozen, just repeating the same coordinate, and the electronic voice says, "Recalculating route." I started to get desperate. Every time I thought I was getting away from the railroad, I ended up coming face to face with it again, without even realizing I had turned around. It was as if that piece of road had swallowed me. The fifth or sixth time I returned to the same point of the crossing, I noticed something that paralyzed me. The train kept appearing again. Always coming from the same direction, with the same noise, the same light, and crossing my truck in the same way, as if time had bent there. But this time I left the cabin first. I ran into the woods and hid behind a tree, trembling. The train passed, and even outside the truck, I felt that absurd heat, as if the air around me had been set on fire for a few seconds. The leaves of the tree where I had actually wilted with the heat. It was as if that train was carrying something other than fire, it was carrying suffering. I waited for over half an hour for the heat to fade. When I got back to the truck, it finally turned on. The radio was playing an unfamiliar station, with old, slow, distorted music. But the GPS had returned to normal, and indicated an exit in 3 miles. I drove without looking to either side, without thinking, as if I was afraid that any wrong move would throw me back into that loop. When I finally saw a gas station in the distance, I almost cried. I stopped there and sat there for a long time, in silence, with my hands covered in an ointment that one of the attendants gave me without asking. It was like he had seen this before. The next day, I took the truck in for inspection. The burn marks were still there, both on the bodywork and on some of the merchandise. The mechanic asked if I had been in a fire or explosion, but he didn't know what to say. He said it must have been the heat from the engine. He laughed and said that engine heat doesn't burn the bottom of the truck, mate. Since then, every time I see a train crossing, even a deactivated one, my body freezes. I avoid it. I take huge turns. And there are days when I stop to sleep, I wake up in the middle of the night hearing that high-pitched whistle coming from nowhere. To this day I don't know what it was. I've never found an explanation. No one believes me. But if you're driving through Missouri, on an old road with a fallen railroad sign, don't stop. Don't look either way. Just drive straight across. Because if that ghost train sees you, it's going to pick you up. And you might never get off its trail again. This delivery was supposed to be just one among many. A farm in the interior of Nebraska, quite far away, dirt road, the kind that barely appears on the map. The client asked me to arrive in the afternoon, but I was late because of a flat tire. I ended up arriving around 8 at night. The sunlight had already gone and all that was left was that faded orange sky behind the field. The farm gate was open, but there was no one in sight. I stopped the truck near the barn, got out and waited for a few minutes. No sound. No soul. Not even a dog barking. This has already started to bother me. I left the engine running and started walking towards the main house, trying to find someone. That's when I heard a strange sound. It sounded like a muffled wail, coming from the opposite side of the barn. A sound that didn't sound like an animal or the wind. It was constant, almost hypnotic. I should have gone back to the truck right then, but I don't know why, I kept walking in that direction. The sound came from a hole surrounded by some rocks, hidden behind a low wooden fence. A well. But unlike any I've ever seen. There was no bucket, no chain, no sign of recent use. It was just a black hole in the ground, with a darkness that seemed to swallow the light around it. I approached slowly, feeling the sound vibrate in my chest. It wasn't just noise, it was as if the well was breathing. I peered inside carefully, expecting to see water or at least mud. But there was no bottom. Nothing. It was like looking into space, into an absolute void. And then, the images began. First, I saw my truck parked on the road, but with the doors open. Then, I saw a body lying on the ground, my body. The clothes, the cap, everything was the same. And blood. So much blood. I wanted to back away, but my legs locked. It was as if the well was showing me something that hadn't happened yet, but was about to happen. And somehow, that was right. The feeling was that something inside me recognized those images. As if they were memories of an inevitable future. I blinked hard and saw another scene, the farmhouse in flames, someone screaming for help, and a child in the middle of the field, alone, looking straight at me. But when I turned to see if there was anything around, there was nothing. I looked back at the well and saw my own face there, as if it were looking at me from inside, but smiling. A crooked smile, as if I already knew the outcome. I took a step back, dizzy, and tripped over a rock. I almost fell in. If I had fallen, I don't know if I would be here to tell the story. I staggered back to the truck, breathing deeply, trying to convince myself that it was just tiredness, stress, maybe dehydration. But when I got into the cab, the seat felt warm, as if someone had just left it. And the key was already in the ignition, even though I clearly remembered taking it with me. The radio turned on by itself, without me touching it, and began to play static that gradually turned into that same sound from the well. It was no coincidence. That sound was following me. I looked in the side mirror and saw the farmhouse, but now with a bright light on upstairs. Up until that moment, no lights had been on when I arrived. I started to back up, ready to leave and never come back, but the truck's headlights illuminated something that froze me, the child. The same one from the reflection in the well. In the middle of the field, alone, standing still, staring at me. She didn't move, she didn't blink, and I can't even remember if she was breathing. Her skin looked too pale, almost gray. I honked the horn, I shouted, but she didn't react. Until she took a step. Just one. And at that exact moment, the sound of the well grew louder on the radio, as if it were reacting to her movement. It was as if that hole knew I was trying to leave. And it didn't want to let me. I stepped on the accelerator and screeched down the road. But no matter how much I drove, the landscape didn't seem to change. Always the same stretch of fence, the same field on the right, the same old wooden posts. As if I were stuck in the same stretched space, a distorted cycle. The speedometer showed that I was moving, but the world around me wasn't keeping up. That's when, in the middle of the high beams, the hole appeared again. In the middle of the road. Without any logic, without any warning. I braked suddenly and felt the truck skid, almost tipping over. When I stopped, the hole was inches from the front. It seemed wider. Deeper. I went down without thinking, as if something was pulling me towards it. The sound now seemed like a voice. I couldn't make out what it was saying, but it was constant, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. I looked inside again. And I saw a different image this time. It wasn't the future. It was now. I saw myself, standing there, looking into the well. But behind me, there was something. A shadow, with long arms, dry skin, and eyes so deep they seemed empty. I tried to turn around, but my body froze. Like a nightmare where you want to run but can't. The only thing I could do was close my eyes and throw myself to the side, moving away from that edge. I fell sideways onto the dirt road, scraping my arm and ripping my pants on the gravel. But the well, it wasn't there anymore. As if it never existed. But the sound, even weaker, was still in the air, coming from nowhere. I limped back to the truck, started the engine, and this time I managed to get out of there. The landscape finally began to change. The fences were gone, the trees were back, and the road looked normal. When I arrived in a nearby town, I went into the first gas station and asked for water. The gas station attendant looked at me strangely and asked if I had passed by the Crossroads farm. He said that place was avoided even by local residents. That no one went there after sunset. I showed him the marks on his arm, the dried blood, and he just shook his head, as if he had seen it before. When I told him about the well, he turned pale and told me that many years ago, a man from the city fell into a well on that same farm, and his body was never found. He said that after that, other people disappeared there, and that some who returned spoke of visions and whispers in the dark. The farm was abandoned, but every now and then a stranger would show up to deliver goods, and they all left differently, some even quit their jobs. That sent a chill down my spine. I just wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. I got home that same night, threw my clothes straight into the trash, and took the longest shower of my life. But when I lay down, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, with the image of my face smiling from inside the well etched in my mind. I spent days avoiding mirrors, sleeping with the light on. Even today, when I close my eyes for too long, I hear that sound. That voice that isn't a voice, calling me back. As if the well was still open somewhere in the world, waiting for me to look again. From that day on, everything changed. I started having strange dreams about places I've never seen, people I don't know, but who recognize me. Sometimes I wake up with sweaty hands, dirty feet, and no memory of how I got out of bed. And, as much as I try to forget, I know that a part of me remained there in that well. Or worse, something from there came with me. I was driving back from Texas, driving an empty truck, just thinking about getting home soon. It was almost midnight when I passed through a very isolated stretch of interstate, with no lights, no signs, just asphalt and headlights. That's when I saw the colorful tent in the distance. A circus. In the middle of nowhere. Lights on, a poorly painted wooden sign that said, "Exclusive show tonight." I thought it was really strange, but tiredness mixed with curiosity made me pull over. I didn't see any cars, no trailers, no sign of an audience. Just the entrance to the tent open and a toy box music playing softly, echoing in the dark field. I got out of the truck slowly, looking around, with the feeling that I was invading something I shouldn't have. But no one came to stop me. I entered the tent. It was bigger inside than it looked. The bleachers were empty, but well lit, and the ring was in the center. In less than a minute, the lights went out and a spotlight came on directly in the center. The music stopped. A tall, thin figure wearing a purple tailcoat and a white porcelain mask appeared, as if he had come out of the ground. Without saying a word, the show began. I don't know how to explain what I saw. These were no ordinary tricks. A masked woman floated in, wearing a dress that moved as if it had a life of its own. A clown, with his mouth sewn shut, pulled a rabbit out of his own belly. An acrobat spun in the air without any rope, but seemed to writhe in pain with each movement. There was no applause, no sound from the audience. I was the only one there. And yet, each artist looked straight at me, as if the show was made just for me. That left me cold. I tried to leave in the middle of the performance, but when I stood up, the tent seemed to have no way out. Everything around me was dark. At the end, all the artists gathered in the center of the ring. The presenter leaned over and pointed straight at me. The lights went out completely, and I stood there in the dark for endless seconds. When the lights came back on, I was already outside the tent, alone, with the truck in the background, the engine running. It was as if nothing had happened. The tent was there, but there was no light, no sign of anyone. I got into the truck, confused, started it, and drove away without looking back. The road looked the same, but the feeling inside me was different. Something had changed. And I still didn't know what. I drove for over an hour trying to forget what I had seen. I convinced myself that I must have been tired, maybe even fallen asleep for a few minutes at the wheel and dreamed it all up. But it wasn't until I stopped at a gas station to get gas that I realized something was still wrong. When I went to pay, the attendant stared at me strangely, as if he recognized me from somewhere. I asked if there was something wrong, and he said, "You have red paint on the back of your neck." I went to the bathroom mirror and, sure enough, there was a red mark, like a poorly drawn symbol. It wasn't blood or regular dirt. It was thick paint, and the more I tried to remove it, the more it seemed to stain. I got back to the truck, even more disturbed. I turned on the radio just to try to distract myself, but every station seemed to have crackled, as if something was interfering with the signal. I started to look in my rearview mirrors. And that's when I saw them. 3 figures standing on the side of the road, far behind me. White masks, all looking in my direction. I thought it was paranoia, but after driving a few more miles, I looked again. There they were. Closer. Always on the same side of the road. Still standing. Just watching me. It seemed impossible that they could catch me on foot, but they always appeared somewhere up ahead. I stopped the truck for a while, got out with a flashlight, and looked around. Nothing. No footprints, no sign of anyone walking around. But when I got back into the truck, one of the masks was on my passenger seat. Alone. As if it had been left there. It was like the ones circus performers used to wear. Cold to the touch, with no smell, but when I turned my back to throw it away, I heard a loud crack, as if someone had stepped inside the cabin. I turned around suddenly, but there was no one there. Just the seat sunk in, as if someone had just gotten out of it. At that moment I panicked. I started the truck and drove off like a madman, accelerating without thinking. I drove for hours, without stopping, until it started to get light. When I finally arrived in a larger city, I stopped at a gas station, parked far away, and tried to get some sleep. But the worst was yet to come. Because even after all that, when I opened my eyes that morning, there was a new mask hanging from the rearview mirror. Different from the previous one. This one seemed to be smiling. From that day on, the masks began to appear frequently. Always in impossible places. Once I found one inside the truck's tool compartment, and I never leave that unlocked. Another time, on the bathroom bench of a roadside restaurant, minutes after I got in. No one saw me with them on, no one ever said anything, but I felt like something was following me. And it wasn't just paranoia. Some nights, I would hear footsteps outside the truck when I stopped to sleep. Slow, shuffling footsteps, always around. And when I worked up the courage to look, I never saw anyone, but the sound continued. One night I woke up to the sound of something hitting the cabin window. 3 dry taps. When I looked, there was one of the figures, standing still, white mask reflecting the moonlight. She didn't move, but the mask now had eyes painted on it, and they stared at me with an expression I couldn't explain. As if they expected me to do something. I didn't try to leave. I just stood there, sweating coldly, until the sun began to rise and the figure disappeared, as if it had never been there. But the feeling remained. And stronger. As if the show wasn't over yet. Like I'm part of the cast now. I ended up going back to the place where I saw the circus, weeks later. Just dirt, some old tire tracks and nothing else. I asked at a roadside grocery store if anyone had seen a circus around there, and the woman just laughed, saying that this circus has taken a lot of people, but it has never left a trace. I didn't have the courage to ask more. I just got back in the truck and left. Since then, I have changed my route. I avoid certain roads, I don't drive at night anymore. But still. I know they still follow me. Sometimes I see a figure standing among the trucks in the rest yard. Or a reflection of a mask in some mirror. They never left. And the weirdest thing is that every time I try to throw away one of the masks, it always comes back. Inside the truck, in the tool bag, or in my jacket pocket. As if to say that I wasn't just a spectator at that show. I was chosen. And that, sooner or later, the show will start again.